Now, the grave that I'm approaching now is the grave of John C. Calhoun, a very controversial political figure. Now, he was born up in the northern part of the state. His daughter married Mr. Clemson, and so that's where Clemson University stands. John C. Calhoun served as twice Vice President of the United States and resigned his position under Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson hated John C. Calhoun. Their divisions went back pretty far to when John C. Calhoun was Secretary of the War Department. Andrew Jackson did not listen to orders not to invade Spanish Florida. So that's where the tension starts. And Andrew Jackson on his deathbed said that his one regret, legend says, is that he said on his deathbed that his regret was that he had never hanged John C. Calhoun. And I mean, he had threatened to do so several times. Now, their main split when John C. Calhoun is the vice president and President Jackson is the president is more of a states' rights issue. So some people say that John C. Calhoun was the father of secession. John C. Calhoun, he stood up in the Capitol building when he was elected senator of South Carolina. He gave a speech where he said slavery was a good thing. That's simplifying the matter. You see, abolitionists had filled an entire room up with letters wanting the government to deal with the issue of slavery. And John C. Calhoun decided it was time to confront the issue. Cut bait and run, or keep it. And John C. Calhoun went on to describe the economics of slavery and how it worked in South Carolina and in the South. Now, during that time, abolitionists would send unsolicited mail to people's houses. And they like to concentrate on on the issue that, slave masters, some would take liberties with their enslaved women and perhaps men. And this was considered like pornography, what they were sending. And it actually caused South Carolina to no longer deliver mail to people's houses. They actually had a post office that you would have to go to retrieve your mail so that people could, siphon through what they considered pornographic images on these mailings so their children didn't see them. So he wasn't like slavery, rah, rah, rah. He's like, these are the realities of our economy. This is the reality of what it is. And John C. Calhoun drafted or signed the Ordinance of Secession several years before the Civil War started. But by the time the Civil War starts, John C. Calhoun has been dead for 10 years. Okay, so there was no Civil War at that time. He was alive to the buildup of the Civil War. So John C. Calhoun is buried here in his wife's plot. But during the Civil War, as it became obvious that the Union Army was going to take Charleston, they were worried that John C. Calhoun was going to be dug up and his body desecrated, because during war, apparently that's what happened when they figured that someone was the leader of a movement. And so to protect his body, the reverend here at St. Philip's and a couple of important men of the city gathered. They dug him up and moved him across the street to the graveyard. They promised they'd come and dig John C. Calhoun up after the war. But of course that never happened, because when the war was over, memories had faded on where exactly they had buried him. Some people say he was under the chairs or the stairs of the church. But his grave was finally located, and they moved him back here to the graveyard where he belonged. You see, to the cemetery where he belonged. You see, the graveyard, you have to be a native-born Charlestonian to be buried in the graveyard. The cemetery side is for people who have not been born in Charleston. And, John C. Calhoun, I blame him for all of the earthquakes we have here in Charleston, because he's down there rolling in that grave. He did not want to be buried in Charleston. He loathed Charleston. He loathed Charlestonians. He thought that Charlestonians were ignorant people that thought that the world revolved around them. Well, I believe that is switched now, and it's people from New York and California who think the world revolves around their states. But nonetheless, here he is, and here he will stay. They tried to dig him up in 2020 during the BLM riots, and St. Philip's put their foot down and said, we're not moving him. So instead, they went to Marion Square and removed his statue. But if you ask me, if you don't like John C. Calhoun, you should be happy with him being in Charleston, because you hated it here. So that's the story of John C. Calhoun.